Hi everyone, I'm Edna Agnes Ekhivalak Elias. I am of Inuit ancestry. My group of Inuit are called Innuinait, and our language is called Inuinnaqtun. I come from the most westerly part of Nunavut territory, and it's dominantly an Inuit community, probably about 80% Inuit. When I was a child, I lived in a nomadic lifestyle with my extended family. I grew up with my parents, my grandparents, and aunts and uncles. So I was raised by more than two people. It took a village to raise me. And so I was very fortunate having like more than one mother, more than one father. Everyone who loved me took great care of me. And I really have felt safe. It was always so warm. Everybody listened to everybody else. And our parents raised each other's children. They all treated us like one big family. And that was really important. I always get warm feelings when I think back to that childhood, being raised by everyone, just with a few cousins that we grew up together. And that's the childhood I remember the best. Living out on the land with my parents and grandparents, following the seasons and moving from land to sea, harvesting land animals, sea animals, migratory birds when they came north, and we just enjoyed life out on the land. We had everything we needed from the land and the sea, lakes and rivers, all our food, and the animals provided us with material to make clothing, and tents, and skins, and many toys. And that was a really nice childhood, up until the time, one day, a float plane came to my grandparents' traditional homeland. And I got so excited. I thought, yay, Mom and Dad are coming, Mom and Dad are coming. Because they lived and worked on a DEW-line site at an American military installation. And I thought Mom and Dad were coming, so I got really excited. We all ran to the beach to see who was coming. And I thought, yes, Mom and Dad's here. No, there was only one white person. I guess he was the pilot, and another Inuk man. And that's the only adults I saw. But when they opened the doors of the plane, everybody was looking inside. And I was small, but I was peering inside. And I could see there was lots of little children sitting on the floor of the airplane. They didn't even have seats to sit on. And some of these children were very unhappy looking. Some were crying. Some were still wiping tears. And there were no adults in the plane with them. And I was wondering what was going on. And I backed away. I was kind of listening to the adults that were on the plane, talking to my grandparents and my aunts, saying that they came to pick up us, the children, and that my parents had given permission for me to get on the plane. Because we had no communication from one camp to the other camp, so I guess they took their word. We had no way of knowing. And so I took off. I still remember this. I remember the good parts of my childhood. I took off. I ran up the river where I used to always play, along the river bank. And when I knew that I was having to get on that plane, I went to my favorite spot up the river. There was a hole in the bank of the river, and I crawled in there and hid. And after a while, I could hear them calling me, calling my name, they were obviously looking for me. And eventually I was found. They found me. And my grandmother had already packed my belongings in a bag. I joined the kids on the plane. We ended up in Cambridge Bay, Nunavut. It was a short flight. They brought us into a big building. It was a school. After feeding us, they brought us into a room, just mattresses on the floor. And they told us now to go to sleep. I don't think anybody slept. I don't recall sleeping. So many kids were crying. Some children are like 6, 7, 8, some are younger. Some still had their baby bottles, but they were long empty, and they were crying because they wanted more milk in their bottle. And most of them just crying for their parents. But anyway, the next day, after we were fed, they took us to the airport. And we were loaded onto a bigger airplane, a bigger aircraft. Many of us had never seen planes before, let alone get on one. But at least this time we had seats. We weren't just sitting on the floor of the airplane. We had no clue where we were going. It seemed like forever to get there. The residential school I went to was in Innuit, Northwest Territories. I was in the Anglican system. The residence was Stringer Hall. That's where I lived with all these other Inuit children. But it was a unique situation because there were Inuit children there, there were white children there, there were Indian children there, as we knew and called them back then. And you know, we were all mixed. We started learning about each other from that young age, you know. It was a neat situation, just learning that we were not all Inuit. Long, long hallways, even long hallways where there's like hundreds of beds in these dorms. And there's already lots of little kids there about our age. You gotta clean up, you gotta shower. And they just show us what to do. And they put this powder in our hair. We learned later it was lye powder. It was to kill off any bed bugs or lice or whatever we might have transported with us. So we had to wear our hair fluffy, sticking out, white powder, white-headed, all these kids with lye in our hair for one full day before we could shower and take it off. And then they would cut our hair if it was too long or whatever. Some of us were just like little crew cuts. But we started to look like one another. They took away the clothes that I had, the clothes that my mother had packed for me in a bag. I never saw those clothes again. She had packed a brand new pair of mittens, kamiks like I'm wearing on my feet, and she had made me a brand new parka, which I should have grown into during the course of the winter. I never saw those again. Never saw them. They gave us girls clothes that looked all alike, a set of clothes for school, and a set of clothes for play. So not only were our hairstyles looking the same, but our clothing looked the same. Some of us knew some English, many of the kids didn't. They tried to use me as an interpreter. I was only like 7 years old, and many of the Inuktitut speaking kids, I did not understand their dialect. And still many of these kids didn't understand me. We came from all over the Central Arctic, from the Arctic, gathered, collected in this little plane and sent off to Inuvik, which I later found out was Inuvik Northwest Territories. But that was the start of my residential schooling. I already was speaking English. My father, having been in residential school for many years, knew English. My mother was unilingual Inuinnaqtun speaker. So I grew up kind of knowing some English and having had 1 year of school in Cambridge Bay. And living with my grandparents, Inuinnaqtun was our mother tongue. We used it every day. I knew it very well. But we were always so very well separated, Anglican Catholics. But I went to residential school to Inuvik 3 times. Once in my elementary year, then once in middle school years, and for grade 8 or 9. Never went consecutively. So I was fortunate that way. My late husband, he had gone for 9 consecutive years. He went to Inuvik speaking Inuinnaqtun. He came out totally in English. Not a word of Inuinnaqtun. But while I was in Inuvik during my middle years, I would start writing letters to my father. I was so homesick. I'd write letters to my dad because it was easier to write to him in English. But he would never write. He never replied. So I thought, well, maybe I'll write to Mom. So I wrote a letter to my mom. Now, my mom did not go to school. She was unilingual Inuinnaqtun speaker. She can read and write what she could, just what she learned how to read and write from the missionary system. And I still knew Inuinnaqtun well enough. I knew it well to write. It took me 3 days to try and write a short letter to my mom using the English alphabet and Inuinnaqtun sounds. That wasn't an easy job, but I got it done. And I took it to the main office and I asked them to send it to my mom. And then I'd forgotten I wrote a letter to my mom until one day a letter came. My mom had written to me, and it was in her writing, Inuinnaqtun writing, and it probably took me just as long, 3 days to read it till I knew what she was trying to say, what she was saying to me. But that started communication. And then by the last time I was in residential school, in grade 8 or grade 9, I realized then, because I continued writing letters to Mother in Innuinnaqtun, that it is important. If I didn't know Innuinnaqtun or couldn't write it, I would have lost all communication with my parents. And even after my third year of residential school, when I went home, it felt awkward. I felt kind of bad because I wasn't speaking Inuinnaqtun as well as I used to. I was starting to throw in English words, and that was not acceptable to our grannies and our parents. And then they would get upset that, sending us to school was just making us forget and lose our language. So I tried really hard again that, I have to maintain my Innuinnaqtun language. I mustn't forget it. I gotta use it with my elders and with my mom as much as I can. And I kept true to that the rest of my life, that my language was very important. And that took me into careers and jobs, and did a lot of work in language revitalization, maintenance, teaching children our language and our culture. But the two went hand in hand. Language cannot be taught without teaching the culture.